Hello, everyone, and welcome to TPS training. My name is Lewis Weber with Behavior Care. This is a quick start training. The idea, of course, is to get you as quickly trained as possible so that you can use TPS data collection in your classroom. We're going to spend some time today on the data entry tab. We're already on the setup tab, as you can see here. We'll be looking at the setup 2. This is for entering in each student's name and increasing and decreasing target behaviors. We'll also take a look at the home note D for home note daily and the weekly home note so that you can send information home to parents. And we'll be looking at datasheet 1. All of these other tabs to the right, and this goes to the right many tabs more, we won't be taking a look at today. That'll be for another training. Okay, so let's take a look at recording periods. That's the first stop here. We want to think about how many recording periods we will set up for each student. In prior years, we tended to use academic blocks as our recording periods, and that still is a good idea. In fact, for this example, that's what we're going to do. But we changed the name from academic blocks to recording periods in case you wanted to have less fewer recording periods than academic blocks. You might have 10 academic blocks during the day, but maybe you would only want to record data in 4 recording blocks. So the first quarter of the day, for example, and the second quarter of the day. And that way you can decide and optimize TPS data collection for your purposes. All right, so same idea, we just changed the name. So let's go ahead and set this up. Let's say we're going to have arrival, and then maybe we'll go right into math, and then maybe we'll have some break, and then perhaps ELA 1 and ELA 2, and then let's say we're going to lunch, and then recess, and let's say specials. We'll stop right. So that's kind of a typical day, and 8 recording periods is what we'll be using. All right, for today, I'm going to be the teacher, so let's put my name here. And we're going to skip over that for right now, and let's take a look at the p-value and the maximum rating. The maximum rating establishes the kind of rating system that you're going to be using with TPS. If you have a 4 there, that means you'll be doing a 0 to 4 rating scale, which from my perspective is the best kind of data system because it allows you to collect the most amount of information. So 0 is 0, 1 would be low, 2 is medium, 3 is high, and 4 is very high frequency, duration, or intensity of data. Now, what those numbers mean need to be established in a separate rubric, and TPS doesn't have that rubric in the TPS data collection, but considers it as a separate requirement. And there are some very handy ways of um, establishing a rubric, and we'll cover that in another training. But the advantage of the 0 to 4 is you have the largest range of data. You still are only entering one number during each recording period for each of the target behaviors. But you may want to use a 0 to 3 rating. That would be a 0 again, and then 1 is low, 2 is medium, 3 is high. So while would you want to do 0 to 3 over 0 to 4, uh, it is more of a personal preference. If you're going to use that style of data collection, I tend to recommend that you just go to 0 to 4 because it gives you the largest range of data. However, in some cases, you want to use a 0 or 1, which is to say, did the target behavior occur or not? That's a really handy way for recording decreasing target behaviors. For example, if a student was verbally aggressive, sometimes we just want to know, did it occur or did it not occur? In that case, you would be using a 0 and 1 rating system, and then the maximum rating would be 1. For this example, let's go ahead and do 0 to 4. So I've entered a maximum rating of 4, and then I put the same value for the quick start purposes, just put the same value here for the P, and I'm going to show you in just a second what that value means. All right, everything else we're going to ignore for the moment. We'll cover that in another tutorial. Okay, setup 2 is where we're going to enter the student's name and the increasing and decreasing target behaviors. And I've already entered some in just to save a little bit of time. We got Pete Moss. Here are the things that the behaviors that we want him to increase. Here are the behaviors we want him to decrease. And for Corey, we have a very different kind of recording system. Stays with the group plan and classroom disruption. Okay, there's no obligation to fill all these blanks with increasing and decreasing target behaviors. In fact, I recommend trying to stay with 2 or 3 for each, so that way you have room to add something later on. Okay, let's go now to the data sheet because this is the easiest way to record the data, and it also gives you a hard copy backup. So data sheet 1, you see here, first thing we do is enter Monday's date of the school week. And the Monday's date is, and we'll say we're setting this up for the first day of the school year, so it would be 8/12/19. And when I enter that date, it fills in all of the days of the data sheet for each student. Now, this window is a little bit small, so let me reduce the size of the data or the data sheets that is. And I know this is quite small for you right now, but you get an idea of how this is organized. So we have each student's data sheet listed, and there's 12 possible data sheets. And the thing about this that's so handy is we have Pete's increasing target behaviors and decreasing targets. And here's Corey's. We're only using the 1 increasing target and the 1 decreasing target. Now you'll note that, we'll make this larger just to see Pete, you'll note that all of the unused academic or recording blocks and the columns for this 4th increasing target and this 4th decreasing target, those aren't used. So wherever there is no data or no data to be collected, TPS puts an X in that field. So we only used 8 of the recording blocks, and so these last 2 get X's. And here it shows us what our rating scale is going to be. Now, if you go to print this, something that's really important to note is Excel is going to want to print all 12 data sheets. So if we wanted to print just Corey's and Pete's, which are the first 2, we would print pages 1 through page 2. And if you don't do that, you're going to print 12 data sheets. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so when you go to print this out, I will show you what this would look like. You'll get a sheet like this, and this is going to be where you'll record the data at the end of each recording block. You might want to make a master data sheet that will be copied as you need, and so in that case you wouldn't want these dates displayed here. You would want to just write them in, and if you want to print a data sheet without the dates, put an N there, top, and then that makes that blank. So that's a nice way to make a master data sheet that you can just photocopy and write in the dates as you go along. Okay, so those data sheets are available using the data sheet 1. You print the ones that you need, and now you have a handy way of recording the data during each of the recording blocks, and it would be a 0 to 4, and all you would do is put the number in each of these cells as the academic block occurs. Now, I'm going to go back to data entry, or going to data entry, uh, because I want to show you how you would be then entering the data from your data sheet. So you're going to enter the numbers that you've collected from your data sheet one. You've had printed this out and you've written a bunch of numbers in here, and you go to um, uh, data entry, and let's say it's the first day of school, and you can see that you've got all of these cells that are available for you to record your data for Pete Moss. And if we go to the right, we see here's Corey's data, and of course we have these X's here because you're not going to be using those cells. So we have classroom instruction and saves with group plan. Corey has the same schedule right now, but because it was established as a default with our setup. But let's say Corey's schedule is going to change. So let's say that instead of break, we're going to have Corey go to OT. Okay. Now, when I enter that, you'll see what happens now is for the next day and all subsequent days, the third recording period is now OT. Now, I want to show you this. When you go back to datasheet and datasheet one, you'll see that that's now listed as the third recording period for Corey. So these data sheets reflect what, oops, too far. These data sheets reflect what has been entered um, on data entry as far as the schedule goes. So if your schedule changes, you want to enter those, or if a student's schedule is different than the default that you've entered in setup, that's what I mean to say. You enter those changes, and you want to do that on the first day of school because it's going to carry forward. Okay, now what you don't want to do is make changes in the schedule if the times of the day or the sequence changes. So let's say at some point later on in the school year, ELA 1 and ELA 2 uh, occurs here and math occurs over here. So these two flip flop. Okay, just leave them where they are in the schedule because what's happening is TPS is going to be looking at the data that is in that particular row. And if you move this over here, the data aren't going to go with it and it'll be confusing to TPS. So while we do establish the sequence as the day goes on, chronological order, temporal order, if it changes, just go ahead and leave the academic blocks recording periods where they are. And even if the second academic block was now ELA, just leave it here and enter ELA data as it is listed as the fourth academic block. So once you've entered it, go ahead and leave it be. Okay, a couple other things I wanted to point out. Let's go back to Pete's data. Let's say during lunch, we're not going to look at um, work completion or work independence. We're not going to want to record that. I'm going to put X's over there, and I'm going to do that on the first day of school. And what that does is it carries those X's forward for the rest of the school year. What that also does is, if we go back to the data sheet and we look at Pete's data, it now puts an X for those two increasing target behaviors because we're no longer going to be recording them. So these data sheets are very interactive with data entry. And this is very handy because you don't want to collect that data, work completion and work independence during lunch. So it puts an X there. It's one less thing for you to have to worry about. So whenever a cell is not going to be used routinely, you put an X there. And that's what the X means up here, where it says not used. Okay. Now, and I'm hopping back and forth between these two, between data entry and setup, data sheet and data entry. But because of the interaction of them, it's the way that I need to explain it to you. Now, when you collect data, there's also the opportunity to enter an N. An N is used when data were not available because uh, the student wasn't available or the academic block didn't occur. Or there's a number of reasons. But rather than leaving them blank, which is unclear as to why it's blank, did you forget to enter data or were data not available, you can put an N there. And so N is different than X. X is not going to be is not used as a routine way, but when you enter an N, it means that for that particular day only, you don't have data because it wasn't available. You can put an N there. When you've entered the N, let's say he came late, and so we say the data were not available. Okay. Now what we are say came during math, and we have all these other cells to enter data. To make things a lot easier for you, which is the bottom line for TPS, there is this yellow square, and the yellow square is to enter a P. Remember that P value that I spoke about for the setup? And that is going to put in data for a perfect day. All fours here, of course, it leaves the N's and the X's intact, and all zeros here for the decreasing target behaviors. And one thing about these ratings, remember, a 4 is not good. A 4 means very high. So if a student was very aggressive, let's say a lot of verbal aggression, you would enter perhaps a 4 here. We want zeros, but the rating scale is just a scale. It doesn't have a quality associated with it, like good or bad. So it just means how much of it you observed. Now, let's say you didn't have a perfect day, right? So let's erase that. And let's say during ELA, his social skills was maybe a 3, and his work completion was a 2. Maybe his work independence was a 1. And during specials, let's say we just give him straight 2s. And let's say over here we had a little bit of verbal aggression, and maybe during specials we had some physical aggression property. We'd put a 2 over there. And then what we can say is, well, everything else he was great, right? So if we put the P in now, it's going to fill in all of the data around those cells with the perfect numbers, which would be a 4 for the increasing targets and a 0 for the decreasing targets. That is a very handy thing to have because if you have to enter each of these cells where there are 4s, it ends up being a very repetitive kind of thing, and all of these zeros. So take advantage of the P. I'm going to click to the right a little bit, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see uh, the recording periods and how these recording periods connect to the area for notes. So let's say we had during ELA some, let's take off the caps, some problems with appear at the work. Okay. And maybe over here we can say did not want to participate um, in art. Now these notes become very important when you start to review a student's performance over multiple days. And we can take a look at those with some of our other tab. But the point that I want to make right now is when you go to make a home note, let's take a look at the home note for the day. I enter the date at the top, which is 8/12. Make it a little bit smaller. And what that's going to do is it's going to convert Pete's data into increasing arrows or decreasing arrows. And you'll recall that Pete had some verbal aggression during ELA. He got a 1. And here he got a 2 for specials for physical aggression to property. Here we have his increasing targets. He had earned 2s during specials, and he earned a 2 and a 1 for work completion and work independence during ELA. But here he got all 4s that were entered by the P. And so this is a home note that is for communication of daily performance, well, to parents. Now look also, it lists the notes that were entered in for Pete during those academic blocks. Also, as we scroll down, you can see that it provides a percentage for the increasing targets and a percentage for the decreasing targets, and it averages those percentages. So 84% of the possible rating points for the day for increasing targets were earned, and 4% for the decreasing targets. Now we want to see this as 0 for the decreasing targets, and we want this to be 100. And I'm going to flip back to data entry one more time, and I'm going to point out these blue, I guess cyan would be more accurate name, colored blocks. And this is a general home note location. So we could say, please send more crayons. Okay. This is a general home note that is not associated with any of the academic blocks. And when we go to the home note, it sends that a message right here. And it's a very handy way to communicate with a parent. And as with everything that you've entered into TPS, this is now part of the permanent record. So you can say, hey, I asked you, on 8/12 to send some more crayons to the parent. If the parent says, you never asked me, you say, well, that was in the home note for 8/12, and here it is. Now let's go back to the home note. When you go to print a home note, you can see again there are 12 pages, and so we want to use, let's say, pages 1 and 2 if we're only printing the notes for Pete and Corey. And here's Corey's data, which we had not entered yet, but if we did, it would show up there. And so if you print this, you can send that home in Pete's folder. Alternatively, you'll note that for each student, there is a rectangle with the word email in it. And what that does, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. When you click on that, it just copies that note. So that way, when you go into Outlook, you can paste it as a picture. And that's a very handy way to send the home note to the parent to their computer or to their cell phone if they're hooked up that way. And of course, many people do have their email on their cell phones. And so that way you don't have to print anything. And it also, you don't have the problem of a student losing the home note and that kind of thing. So it would send it to your um, to the parent through the internet. Now, all this is doing is copying the home note so that you can paste it in Outlook. It doesn't send anything. It really is just a copy for email. And now you know that. So when you go to send it, you want to paste as a picture. Keep that in mind. Okay, one more thing to review, which would be the home note for the week. And once again, at the top of the left, you put Monday's date of the school week. We only have data for Monday, and so it's going to show up here. We have Tuesday, and when we're going to enter some data, I'll show you what that would look like. And again, when you print it, you have 12 pages, so be sure to print only the pages you need. So here's Pete's weekly report. And if you wanted to send it to email, you would click on that, it would copy it, and then once again, you would paste it as a picture in an email to a parent. So let's go back to data entry. Let's enter some data for the next day. Let's say we had a 1 over there, maybe a 2 there, and a 1, and the rest of the day was pretty good, so I'll enter a P. Now I've entered data for Pete for the next day. Let's say during ELA, something positive. Pete had a great reading session. Um, and thanks for the crayons. And now when we go to print the home note, we would put the next day, A12, A13, and it will list the data for A13, and the same thing for each day that you want to make a home note. And we go to home note for the week. We see that those data are now shown here. And when you go to print that, uh, all your notes will show up as well. Okay, so that's the quick start. I'm thinking for a moment, is there anything else I need to tell you? And of course, there is so much more to talk about. But that's the quick start for TPS. And as you scroll down, you can get more and more data entered. All of your dates have been entered for each student. So that's a handy way of uh, establishing the data entry area for each student for each day. And I'm thinking, well, it sounds like about it. So let's just say put a bookmark in it for TPS Quick Start tutorial. Again, Lewis Weber here for behavior care, and thanks for participating in today's